welcome to Art with Alison. Today we'll be discussing composition and how objects are placed in a scene. So today we're going to talk about composition. What does that mean to compose a scene? Staring back at this white page that's, I don't want to mess it up. What do I do? Help. So let's think about first just the general idea of what does it mean when someone says it's dead center. What is dead center? Why is that a bad thing? Dead center means that nothing of anything visually important, or it should not be here. So if I were to draw a ball or anything, we don't want any of the main subject of the viewing to be right here. The only time that actually works, the only time that's actually like okay, is like when they do like in the cartoons, like Mickey Mouse's face right before that first slate, right before the cartoon starts, and it's just like da 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 da, you know, or even like, you know, Warner Brothers. It only works because it's literally only a second or two long. After that, you're like, yeah, okay. It's just like the face in the middle of the page. It's a visually boring concept. If we put anything of interest in there, we get tired really quickly. There's this whole idea the Greeks kind of discovered, which is the idea of the rule of thirds. I'm sure you've heard about. This idea, well, that's right. Basically, the idea is that if we were to break up the page into thirds, this is what's considered what they call the golden section. This is our like main page. So this thirds view, anything of importance should be happening in here. That's the key. Visually, we want to keep things on the page. Anything that starts to go too far out in this direction or too far in the center, we start to create a sense of tension that actually happens. The closer an object gets to the edge, the more it almost feels like it's about to fall off. So there's this idea of creating where we even crop our piece is going to dictate how well we interpret it and how much we understand it compositionally. Just cropping a piece is going to change it. And that's just true in photography as well. This is basic film, photography, art, the concept of on the canvas, on the page, on the screen. What does that mean? We want to keep things visually interesting. Now, another idea, as you can see with our random still life of two oranges, is the idea of informal balance, formal and informal balance. Again, this idea of boringness, that we have two objects of equal distance on the same plane, or even like a little square, it doesn't matter. These pieces, if they're the same, it becomes very boring. We then kind of like, yeah, okay, there's nothing really exciting happening. There's no contrast. There's no feeling of tension or like, oh no, something's different. Suddenly, when we put an object in that's different, it becomes more visually exciting and interesting, that we're like, whoa, look at the difference. Our brains are like, cool, there's something different. This one's bigger than this one. That one's got to change. That's the type of stuff that's going to make a piece interesting. If you make sure that you're able to mix up and create contrast within the shapes themselves, you're going to have more visual interest, as well as where's my cropping. If I crop it here and say, it's all the way over here, if we go circle and there's a lot of space there, maybe not so much space there. Our eye gets pulled in this direction. There's almost like gravity, this tension that's created. What if we cropped it right there? Even more tension. What if we're completely cropping it at all? Like now it's going away. Like so this idea of even where we're cutting and putting theoretically the mat, the frame in framing it. And even, you know, you see directors, they put the frame, they're putting their hand up, they're imagining the shot. They're literally cropping out what you don't see or need to keep focus on what you do want. And how is that visually communicating a story? Now I'm going to also talk about, run out of paper, the idea of, and you're like, oh no, she's going to talk about math, run, geometry. Geometry is something that X, Y, and Z or Z, these axes are in everything. I mean, the geometry, that's in 3D modeling. This is, you need to be able to communicate and understand this three-dimensional form in space, right? That's kind of a tricky one. Let's try it again. Let's try that again. So we can do square, and then it goes off into space. Bloop. We'll make it go up. See. This Z space, what does that mean when I say Z space? And that means the Z space is coming out towards the camera. This is the idea of if we have X, which is left and right, we have Y, which is up and down, and then I have Z. And Z is that forward camera move. This is me going towards the camera, that my hand is more forward and more positive in Z than my head or my other arm, which is more negative in Z in the sense. So if you can imagine and communicate that Z depth, you're going to have a more communicative, just going to be a deeper experience. There's going to be, it's not flat. We need to remember that the objects that we're rendering are three-dimensional objects in space. And so with that, here, this will help. We'll shade our sides. That this idea of remembering the 6 sides of a cube, thinking about the foreshortening of a cylinder, that objects are going to be bigger, closer to the viewer, to the eye, to the camera. They're going to diminish and get smaller as they get further away. Now this idea we're going to apply as well in the concept of perspective. No! She's talking about perspective, run! This is the whole trains, tracks. This one-point perspective, there's one point, we have a horizon line. We have our one point, the vanishing point. Everything vanishes and disappears into that point that then we can even put like, there's our little train. Theoretically, we could also pull that and actually start to create a train if we follow these rules. I'm kind of doing a terrible job of it. But this is we can then create multiple points. We can, once we have this distinction of the actual horizon line, we can create our vanishing point, and from there realize everything else can be built off of that. So any buildings stay vertical and then can feed into that these lines. And this is an example of that is in the Last Supper. Actually, you can see there's literally sitting at a table. There's Jesus in the middle. We have the apostle Jews hanging out. Everyone's around them. But the way that it's arranged, even the table itself, is like angled like this. I'm purely drawing the Last Supper from memory, how dare I. But this idea of Jesus is in the center. Everything else is, even the background, everything is pulling towards that central focus to look at that. And even then though, he's pushing the composition because it's not dead center. If you look at it, he really is, I think it's again in that golden section because there's more space down below and it's cropped. And so even theoretically, I know I'm scribbling all over the place, but this is this idea that even these abstract concepts can be applied into something simple as drawing a still life. So with that, we're going to do a still life setup and apply some of our composition and sort of perspective concepts. So that'll be coming up next. Now, I am going to do my line of action. And I'm already doing my golf swing. You can see my arms already preparing for the interpretation. This is kind of how it's going right now. Now, let me see. Push that up, kind of high up on the composition. Put that there, the bowl, roughly. Let's put the tomato. I'm looking at it. I'm going to actually move it a little bit more to the side. This is my artistic license coming in. I don't have to do what the setup tells me. I can be defiant and say, no, I don't want to. I can make choices. I'm making educated decisions. I am not just blindly copying and following what I see. As Glenn Vealpool, the amazing background artist for Disney and lots of Saturday morning cartoons, he teaches a lot about art and talks about that too, that we don't copy, we analyze. We make decisions with our brain. We make conscious, educated choices of how the image is going to look and how it's going to work as a whole. So I'm just kind of, again, doing this super abstract, super not distinct, doesn't really make sense. Kind of, and what this is I'm just giving myself notes. I'm literally just taking notes, saying, okay, this is a general idea of where things are. I'm not committing to anything. I'm not saying, yeah, that's definitely going to happen. It's more of just like kind of relative to everything else. I'm just kind of pushing it a little bit and saying, okay, here's that, there's that. Finding the boundaries, really. And so it's not so much about being precise. I'm just kind of finding it. So now I've got white fabric. My lightest lights are pretty much the fabric short of the highlights on the little peppers and the tomato. So with that, actually I need to get this one's softer. This one's more broken in. Let's see, go lightest lights. Where is the light hitting? What is closest to the light source and where is it hitting the object? So as you see, again, I'm doing this super abstract. I'm seeing shadow and light patterns. I'm seeing this sort of T shape of light hitting the fabric, the top surface of that sort of hat box underneath. I'm seeing it hit over here. We're also defining the tomato based on the background. The actual fabric itself is now dictating the shape of the tomato. So we use our environment to describe our background, or use our environment and background to describe our subject. We don't just have this hard outline. A lot of times the atmosphere in the background is the way that we describe it. So now I'm going to think about the peppers a little bit, just a splash. These ones I need to, so I could easily just cut, draw each individual pepper, but that's not really necessary. I think it becomes busy really fast. And so I need to simplify it into its super abstract shadow and light patterns. And you're seeing I'm just making these like weird dot shapes. I'm literally just seeing where the light is hitting the objects and just responding to that. I'm filtering out all the other information. My brain is consciously, with intention, removing out certain information so that I can see the greater whole. It takes practice. It takes practice to be able to simplify it, really. Our brains so badly want to make sense of everything we're seeing and be like, oh yeah, I know what it is, and be able to label it. And so if we can push that a little bit and say, let's find out first, let's wait. Let me observe and let that come through. And so you see I'm building it slowly. I'm just erasing out what I see as the lightest lights. Maybe now I'm going to give it some attention to the tomato. Let's see. The red tomato, a little bit, just kind of on the little fluffs at the end. What about that? The garlic. You see I can shape it to fit what I want it to be. And let's see, we got the lime. Now, I've got that. Okay, so I see that the paper and the fabric itself are relatively tonally the same. Because of that, I don't want it to be too much the same. So I'm actually going to, with purpose and intention, make it darker to create more contrast on this white fabric. That's not what I'm seeing, but my brain is analyzing it. I'm not copying, I'm making choices so that when we pop out that fabric, it now has something to contrast against. And so it becomes even more white in a sense. It's all relative. Everything is relating to something else. The purple onion, the red onion, is very dark, right, relative to everybody else. So I need to give it some attention. I'm seeing darkest darks, lightest lights. Here's my darkest darks. Oh, the shadow on the tomato. There we go. Now I'm also seeing, which will help define the garlic, is the shadow on the lime. Again, gives it that energy. And I'm also using the side, right? I'm not using the tip of the pencil or the charcoal. I'm using the edge, the side edge, and cutting in with that. And that allows for it to be a little bit looser too. I can't really like over push it if I'm holding from the side. It's a little bit not so exact. And that's okay. I don't want it to be exact quite yet. We want to find a little bit of softness first. And so then as we can, what they would say like in model making is to creep up on it. And creep up on it, take your time, slowly build up to it. Doesn't have to be this immediate, quick response. So with that, I'm now going to add more. The onion needs more darkness. And I can also smooth it too. And if you notice, I'm going to be smoothing it in the direction I'm literally radiating towards the center. Even it gives it that motion of flowing forward. It's that type of stuff too that makes a difference. Just the direction of the way that you draw against the form is going to help to dictate the energy of that form as it's turning the edge or whatnot. So, there we go. In the beginning, it doesn't really make sense as a tomato or as an onion, but that's okay. It's there. And you know what? Part of it too is that it's got this little skin coming off. And then there's this. And then I've got my tomato shadow. You see, I'm just slowly working down the line of where's my darkest dogs. Here's my cross my T's, crossing T's, crossing T's. So I also drew the tomato, but I want the garlic to be in front. So I want garlic forward. Same garlic forward of the lime. And that's these T crossing will allow that. So it's describing who's in front of who. That darkness. This is a crisp edge. This is a crisp edge. I'm always dancing back, always going back and looking. Always going back and looking. It's like you fill in, you see one thing, you take your snapshot of what you want to add, bring it in, go back and look. So it's this constant seesawing. I'm never staying in one place on the page, or even in general just standing. I don't just stay there and just lock in. I'm constantly moving. There's this constant sort of flow that's happening, this observation and responding to the scene. And so I'm even thinking about the shadow that's being cast from the tomato, thinking about the shadow generally that's being cast kind of by the garlic. I'm doing this. Let's see. Got that sort of turn of the fabric. We could go and really play with the luminosity of the fabric and subsurface scattering, which is basically like skin or whatever, the concept of light hitting a subject. Then it bounces back and forth. So that's where like when light hits our skin, we're not like a smooth plastic surface in like VFX. There's literally light that the photons like bounce around in sort of the layers of the skin. And so there's a luminance, a radiance that happens within objects in light. And so there's something to think about with that too, paying attention to how the light is dancing on the object, how much of it is reflecting out, how much is radiating light or absorbing it. So there's some stuff that's happening underneath in these sort of underfolds where there's light coming through the fabric underneath. And we could spend, that's where it's like the amount of time, how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go, and the concept of detail. How much detail do we really want to communicate? And that's, obviously time and effort has a lot to do with that. But it's also about, for the overall piece, does it make sense? So now I'm going to start to make some decisions on my shishito peppers of actual like outline, roughly, whatever that means. Just kind of finding their form, finding the edge of them. And even then, I don't want to fully outline them. It's a fine balance of indicating and then sort of letting things flow. So here, a little bloop. And then I am finding this little stem. Found a little creaky spot in the floor. This stem. And of course we were using value, so it's going to be a little bit harder to tell. If we were using, color or using pastels or something, it'd make a little bit more sense. Just, it's how much are we able to tell of the story in a way. But that's okay. That's all right. The story of the peppers can be a short one. But I just want to kind of give maybe a little indication of the form a little bit. And then let's see, there's this lid of the bowl. It's a very this clear lip that's happening. And what actually is happening is the light's hitting that top edge, and then there's shadow on this lower part to the point where, see, it's like right along the edge, and then right along here. But then we get some reflected light. Even on a wood object, wood bowl, we're going to get some reflected light. There's going to be, even though it's subtle. So with that, okay, I could stay on the bowl for a long time. Got to keep moving. If you ever ask yourself the question like, have I been here too long? Am I working on this thing too long? The answer, if you ask yourself the question, the answer is yes. So I just asked myself the question, am I spending too much time on the peppers? Yes. Okay, keep going. Got to keep moving always. So this, you can see, we're just kind of rendering out. Now I'm going to kind of think about my little edges. Let's think about how this fabric terminates. Where's my corner point? Let's do this. I'm going to add a little bit of this shading, but I don't want to get too dark. It's a fine line of how do I describe what's happening without making it be muddy. I mean, telling too much of the story. I also feel like that tomato's falling, so I think I need to bring it up a little bit. Oh, what'll help is its shadow. Kind of. Feels like it's kind of falling, because it kind of is. It's sort of on the edge. That's all right. Right? We don't have to always have it be making sense. It's kind of like, whoa, the tomato's about to fall. Catch it. I know. I make stories all the time with the produce, the things that I'm creating. I always have little voices for my tomatoes and my garlic, and I feel like if you can be silly and playful, you're gonna have more fun, of course. You're not gonna take it as seriously. So if things, in air quotes, make a mistake, you're not gonna be as hard on yourself. You're just gonna have a little bit more fun. You're gonna be just a little bit more whimsical. And so, I know it sounds silly, but I'll even give voices to the onions and be like, hey, what's going on? And silliness, but I think that silliness is what brings life. If you can imagine even a tomato or a lime having a voice, having feelings. It sounds silly personifying inanimate objects, but everything that we create is a story. We're telling stories constantly in everything that we're making. Every art is storytelling. And so if we can even tell the story of the happy garlic next to the onion, that's part of it. We're explaining this world that we're viewing to other people. And so that's just another avenue, another way of approaching it. That why am I so silly, and why am I sometimes talking to my subjects as though they're real people? Because in a way you kind of want to, even if it's you're doing a portrait of a king. Theoretically, that's what my training should be for. I want to treat even the mundane, like an apple or a tomato. They too can be treated like royalty and be appreciated and observed and recognize its beauty. So I'm just adding my little doodad and details. I think we're hitting the chalk phase where it's like, oh, she's getting chalk out. That means highlights. That means we're getting close. So with this, I'm using a lot of white. And that'll help as well pop out and create this contrast against the paper. because the paper also has a bit of creaminess to it, though it's not quite like a true white where the chalk is. So always stepping back, always moving. I need to get more darkness here. So now that I've rendered of the other things, I need to see collectively who is dominant, and I need to make this more dark relative to the things around it, because it is. That I need that level of contrast. So I'll add that extra layer in. Gotta make some extra little lines for it. And sort of feel like it's a tomato, or sorry, an onion. So now I'll grab my chalk. And we can do some little bits of that, maybe that, and then the garlic. Let's see, lime, highlight. You see, I'm just systematically just working my way through the piece, kind of with each phase, imagining what does it need, who's next, where does it need to go. And even tonally, I feel like the shishito peppers, I got to take them down a notch too. See how I can just kind of like add a little bit of tone to it. And then let's crisp up that edge. And then crisp up that edge. How are we guys? How are we doing, everyone? How's my little salsa? It looks like a makings of a salsa. I think we're getting kind of close. I think, you know what I mean? We could I could keep playing and keep erasing and pushing and pulling and finding new things. And I think the only last bit would be, let's give some love to, oops, oh, chalk. Let's give some love to the tomato, really. Oh my goodness. There we go. Tomatoes. Let's see what's happening. There we go. So I think we're kind of wrapping it up. This is pretty much, once I get the chalk phase, we're kind of hitting the last looks. So composition, drawing, placing on a page. What does that mean? Here, let me show you really quickly too. Cropping. If I were to crop the piece, how does that change? Are things different? What about now? I'm kind of going in between to there. What if I cut it off there? What if we cut it off here and go right through the onion? Where we put the edge is going to matter based on relationships. The closer I crop it to this, as it gets to the edge, it creates a sense of tension. If I open it up, it creates a sense of space. So these are concepts that we can apply when we're creating anything. The idea of relationships of the frame and the object in the frame and where that's placing. And you can even see my general idea of the, what's it called, the golden section. All of the important things are just around the edge. Dead center, nothing should be happening. Zero, nothing of importance. There's zero exciting stuff happening right here. So with that, hopefully you've learned a lot about composition and drawing objects in a cardboard box. Our next episode, we will be discussing color temperature and color theory.